Hey guys, Bingocat here. Windows 8. Another operating system by Microsoft that was hated by a lot of people. Windows 8 was released to consumers in October of 2012, and Windows 8 was released at a very interesting time. Windows 8 was introduced right in the middle of the mobile revolution, and at first glance, Windows 8's user interface looks like something you might find on a smartphone or tablet. Thanks to the introduction of modern smartphones with the iPhone in 2007 and modern tablets with the iPad in 2010, traditional PCs were starting to become a lot less relevant to many people. Microsoft, in an attempt to rekindle enthusiasm around Microsoft Windows, and in an attempt to take a stronger foothold in the mobile space, decided to take a more mobile approach with the user interface design of its next operating system after Windows 7. Where Windows 7's user interface was largely keyboard and mouse based. However, the design changes to Windows 8 massively backfired, with many consumers and businesses hating the design changes to Windows 8. This led to the release of several updates to the operating system to try and improve the design, with Windows 8.1 introducing things back to the operating system that were missing upon the original release of Windows 8, such as the Windows Start button. However, this still wasn't enough to convince consumers and businesses to give the operating system a chance, and many people decided to stick with Windows 7 until Windows 10 was released. Today, Windows 8 is largely considered one of Microsoft's biggest blunders and one of the worst operating systems of all time. But was Windows 8 really that bad?
There's no start menu! And I try to click on that part of the screen! It takes me as metrosexual! I don't want Metro, I want the desktop!
Windows 7 was a massive success for Microsoft. Windows 7, which was basically a more stable version of Windows Vista, was released in October of 2009, which was right around the time the smartphone revolution was taking off, but before modern tablets started taking off. Development of Windows 8 started before Windows 7 was even released, and was largely developed with a mobile revolution in mind, with a version of Windows 8 being planned to be released on ARM processors, in addition to x86-64 processors. In an attempt to modernize the user interface of Windows, Microsoft created a new design language for Windows 8's user interface, originally referred to as the Metro design language, but was later changed to the Microsoft design language before the release of Windows 8. For the purposes of this video, I'll be referring to Windows 8's new user interface as Metro. Metro was largely based around the principles of large, eye-catching typography and the ability to consolidate groups of common tasks to speed up usage. To put in simpler language, the Metro UI was supposed to be easily readable and easy to navigate. One of the crowning features of the Metro UI in Windows 8 was the introduction of the full-screen Windows Start screen, which replaced the Windows Start menu that was present in Windows 95 through Windows 7. The purpose of the Start screen was to allow users to have an easy, one-stop, touch-screen-friendly place that they could access all the relevant information and apps on their computer. One of the biggest features of the Start screen was the introduction of live tiles, which were basically just fancier icons that could display information pulled from various sources in real time, without requiring the user to open an app to see. With the introduction of the Metro UI also came the introduction of Metro-style apps, which are nowadays known as Universal Windows Platform apps or Windows Store apps. Windows Store apps in Windows 8 were available through the then new Windows Store, which was basically an app store similar to the ones found on mobile devices, but for your PC. Windows Store apps in Windows 8 did not run in a separate window, rather, they ran completely full screen. The reason Microsoft did this was supposedly in an attempt to provide a less cluttered user interface to end users, but unfortunately, this made multitasking harder, despite the presence of a split-screen multitasking mode in Windows 8. The original version of Windows 8's Metro UI was largely touch-based and was best navigated using touch gestures. Windows Store apps were perhaps infamous for being difficult to navigate by keyboard and mouse users, with the original version of Windows 8 not having a close or minimize button for Metro apps. Windows 8 also saw the introduction of the Charms bar, which was a vertical toolbar that could be accessed by swiping on the right edge of the screen via a touchscreen, or moving the cursor to the correct hotspots at the right corners of the screen, which provided access to important system and app-related functions. Despite all these user interface changes, Microsoft also retained most of the user interface and functionality that was present in Windows 7 through the use of a desktop tile on the Windows Start screen. By clicking or tapping this tile, you are brought to a user interface extremely similar to the one used in Windows 7, and this user interface could be used, for the most part, the exact same way you could use Windows 7's user interface. However, one glaring omission from Windows 8 was that there was no way to boot up to the Windows desktop by default, forcing users to interact with this start screen, whether they wanted to or not. Reception to the user interface changes to Windows 8 were overall mixed. Some people praised the new UI changes in Windows 8, with some people praising the start screen to be a great place for users to interact with dynamic information, compared to the folder-littered desktops of most other desktop operating systems. Many other critics also loved how the Metro UI worked with touchscreens particularly well. However, many people who use Windows with a keyboard or mouse instead of a touchscreen were not happy with the user interface changes to Windows 8, with many users claiming it was more difficult to navigate than Windows 7. Simple things in Windows 8, like shutting down the operating system, were not immediately apparent to users how to do. I remember back in 2012, before Windows 8 was released, I thought the user interface changes to Windows 8 looked so unintuitive and predicted that people would not like the changes, and it turned out I was right. Personally, I even bought a touchscreen monitor for my desktop so I could utilize the touchscreen functions of Windows 8 back when I used Windows 8, but I never found myself using the touchscreen, even in situations where touch may have been easier to use than using a keyboard and mouse. Microsoft was criticized for not providing in-depth instructions on how to navigate the operating system, despite the user interface changes made in Windows 8 being the most radical user interface changes made to Windows since Windows 95. As a result of the user interface changes made to Windows 8, adoption of Windows 8 was slow compared to Windows 7, with many people and businesses choosing to skip over Windows 8 entirely, hoping Microsoft would fix the design problems that were present in Windows 8 in a future release of Windows. Windows 8 was also blamed for the biggest PC sales slump in 19 years in the first quarter of 2013 due to the lack of user interest in buying PCs with Windows 8. Microsoft, due to the negative reactions to Windows 8's new user interface, released Windows 8.1 in October of 2013, which set to improve the Metro UI for keyboard and mouse users. This saw the restoration of the Windows Start button on the desktop, although clicking the button would open the Start screen instead of a Start menu, which was still absent with the release of Windows 8.1. A new Quick Links menu was also added to Windows that could be accessed by right-clicking the Start button, which provided links to administrative tools on your computer, and also provided quick access to the shutdown and sign-out options. Users can now also boot to the desktop by default, allowing the option to bypass the start screen entirely upon booting up. An update to Windows 8.1, called Windows 8.1 Update, was released in April of 2014, which added close and minimize buttons to Windows Store apps, and also allowed users to see and pin Windows Store apps to the desktop taskbar, which wasn't possible in the original versions of Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. As a result of the user interface changes to Windows 8, several third-party companies came out with programs that could change the user interface of Windows 8 to behave more like the user interface of Windows 7. Classic Shell, for example, was a popular program that could put a Windows 7-style start menu into Windows 8. Stardate was another popular program by Stardox that essentially did the same thing as Classic Shell. Stardox also came out with a program called Modern Mix that would allow you to run Windows Store apps in resizable windows on your desktop. I personally used Classic Shell and Modern Mix myself back when I used Windows 8 as my main OS, and as a result, I basically never had to use the start screen. Ultimately though, most of the user interface problems of Windows 8 were solved with the release of Windows 10. Windows 10 saw the return of the Windows Start menu, and saw the introduction of the ability to run Windows Store apps in windowed mode, among other things.
Okay, this is Diana's first time on the computer using Windows 8.
Hate it.
How much money would you pay right now if they said, we're going to install it on your computer, if you don't have it installed, you've got to pay a fine of $100. Would you pay the fine of $100?
Pay the fine of $100. I've had enough of it.
And how much do you think they're saying that it costs to buy Windows 8 now?
They should pay people for it.
Looking past the questionable user interface changes to Windows 8 though, Windows 8 also had many new features which were received fairly positively. Windows 8 saw faster boot times than Windows 7 due to the introduction of a new feature called Fast Startup. Windows 8 also saw several improvements to the Task Manager and saw several new improvements to Windows Explorer, now called File Explorer, which were meant to make both the Task Manager and File Explorer easier to use. Windows 8 also saw several security improvements, such as the introduction of a built-in antivirus program called Windows Defender. Windows Defender was basic compared to other antivirus programs at the time, but having Windows Defender included with Windows 8 was a step up from Windows 7, which had no built-in antivirus. Windows 8 also saw the introduction of a new file backup system called File History, which worked by creating incremental backups of files stored in designated folders, which is similar to how Apple's Time Machine functionality in OS X worked. If you had Windows 8 Pro or Enterprise, you also got access to Microsoft's Hyper-V platform, which allowed you to run virtual machines within Windows 8. Windows 8 also saw improvements for multi-monitor support, by allowing you to span the taskbar across multiple monitors, and Windows 8 also allowed you to choose different wallpapers for each monitor. Windows 8 saw the introduction of per-display DPI scaling, which allowed the user to choose different user interface scaling amounts for each display they had connected. Windows 8 also added native support for USB 3.0, unlike Windows 7, where a separate driver had to be installed to use USB 3.0. Windows 8 was also ported to devices using ARM architectures and a version of Windows called Windows RT, but unlike regular Windows 8, couldn't run traditional Windows desktop applications. Windows 8 saw the introduction of the ability to reinstall Windows without the need for installation media through the use of the reset and refresh options, which could be accessed from the advanced boot options menu and PC settings respectively. Windows 8 also saw the introduction of Microsoft's cloud-based storage system called Skydrive, which is nowadays known as OneDrive. Windows 8 also saw the introduction of cloud-based syncing services, which allowed the user to sync their Windows address book, photos, settings, Skydrive data, etc. to sync up with the cloud, which could be synced to any Windows 8 device that the user wanted to sync with. Perhaps best of all, despite all the new features that Windows 8 introduced, Microsoft was able to do all of this somehow without raising the hardware requirements of Windows 8 from the hardware requirements of Windows 7. So was Windows 8 really that bad? At first, yes, but after Windows 8.1 was released, a lot of the problems with the original version of Windows 8 were fixed, and if you were willing to install a couple of third-party programs to improve the user interface of Windows 8, the performance improvements and the rest of the new features that were added to Windows 8 made Windows 8 overall a very good operating system. It could even be argued that Windows 8 even stimulated innovation in the PC hardware industry again, with many new interesting PCs being introduced after the release of Windows 8, such as the introduction of the popular 2-in-1 laptop-tablet hybrid PCs. Anyways, thanks for watching guys. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and please check out my Twitter, Instagram, and Discord, linked down below in the video description. As always, I thank you guys for watching. Goodbye.